Predictable client acquisition with a relationship first lens. So I am today gonna present to you the best way to achieve predictability in your client acquisition, how you can do that while balancing technology and human connection. It's one of my favorite topics and things to think about is in this age when AI is kind of getting getting out of hand, growing very quickly. And how do we retain and prioritize the human connection? Because I think that is absolutely essential. And how can we actually use tech and AI to enhance that rather than detract from that? So that's a big piece on the agenda today. We will talk about how to effortlessly manage leads and progress the pipeline, and sharing some real examples and templates so that you can take that and apply that for yourself for immediate success. So first thing is predictable client acquisition. What do I mean with predictable, and what method, what vehicle is best to utilize in order to build that predictability? What do I mean by relationship first, and how can we apply that? The power of positioning, and especially as a fractional, how you can position yourself to stand apart from the rest and to clearly communicate the value that you can bring a business. Pipeline management, real-world insights, and then finishing up with a Q&A. So let's dig in. Now, Outbound is my preferred source, and that's what I'm gonna be talking about today. I have about a decade of experience running my own business. So I started about a decade ago building my own, and I've therefore tried content, I've tried SEO, I tried ads, I've gotten a lot of referrals along the way, and referrals are awesome. And I am willing to bet that almost all of you, maybe all of you, kind of rely on referrals, or at least have that as a main source. That is a sign that you're doing a great job. That is excellent. But the downside is that it's very hard to predict. When does the next one come? Will the next one come? Etc. So predictability becomes absolute key once you're a bit up and running as a fractional. All of the other ones I mentioned there can't be as predictable as Outbound. SEO relies on website traffic, ads on ad spend, and God knows what else in there. Content relies on the algorithms, etc. Outbound is in your control. It is about learning how do you articulate your value and how you can be beneficial for a certain person so well that a stranger will want to talk to you, right? That's a skill that you can learn that no one can take away from you. And it matters less if you then send a message on LinkedIn or in an email or you go door knocking, right? It's quite inefficient, but the point is you have the skill to attract the person you want to attract. That's why I prefer Outbound. So first step in that, and it's slightly counterintuitive in a way, but a basic personal branding is very important. Who sends a message is just as important as what the message contains, maybe even more, right? So I'm big on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is the best platform for fractional specifically because it is generally B2B, and email is becoming increasingly hard to break through the noise because it's very impersonal. It's just blank text. If you can do a nice looking LinkedIn profile that reflects who you are and the value that you bring, and then you send a message to someone, of course, they're going to click in and get a little bit of feel for who is trying to connect with me, who's sending me a message. If that looks good and resonates, the likelihood that they're going to answer your message is way higher, right? So we don't need personal branding to become influencers. We don't need to create daily LinkedIn content. In fact, that's probably not the best investment of your time, especially early on. But a basic branding that reflects the value that you provide people and is aesthetically pleasing to give a good first impression, that's a very important base to start from. Now, diving in a little bit to the balance of technology and human connection. And my background was I started my business on social media. So I grew my first business on Instagram. I grew the second one on Twitter. And I recently have been all over LinkedIn for a few years. So I'm coming from it from a digital point, a very modern point. But something that I think always, it was always a priority to me to connect with people and to not get stuck in talking to my phone or talking to my computer, but rather looking at who is the person on the other side here. How do I connect with people and how do I use technology to do that? Now, in the more technology grows, the more convenient solutions we find, the more tempting it is to just use a tool to send a message to 10,000 people. we all know how this feels when we get a message, which is like 10 times a day. So that is completely irrelevant from a stranger. That is them leaning too much in direction technology, right? It's not relevant. It's not authentic. It doesn't feel personal. It doesn't work. If we go on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? If we're thinking about this on a spectrum where technology is on one angle and human connection in the other, that would be probably door knocking. Reason I'm referencing that is because I have a story coming up on my own background in door-to-door sales. Way too inefficient and not gonna work because you're not gonna reach the number that you need in this digital age, right? So these are just some examples number to illustrate that. These are kind of industry standards considered good numbers in outbound for cold email or for LinkedIn. So on cold email, if you get 1% positive replies from the messages you send, that's considered good, right? So 100 messages need to be sent to get one positive reply. Now, that's not yet a call booked or a meeting or a client signed, obviously, right? That's still considered good, right? So you still need to send 100 emails. Now, we want to improve those conversions. That is not the point here. We want them to be as high as possible. The point is to illustrate how much volume is actually required. Doing that manually and doing that without any technology, it's not really going to be beneficial either. On LinkedIn, the numbers are a bit better, and actually the reason for that is because of that branding aspect, that it is more personal. So you can expect more of a 30-35% connection acceptance when you send out connections to new people, and then 10-20% of your messages thereafter to be positive replies, right? Still, though, quite a lot of volume required to get anywhere, right? Doing that manually, and it's going to be really hard to reach numbers. So point being, we need to find a balance between technology and human connection and find a way to integrate them so that technology actually enhances our ability to connect and build relationship with people. Right. So you need to hit these numbers and you need to hit those numbers also in order to improve those numbers. That's a bit of a predicament people miss, that the more quantity we can put out, the more we actually learn, the more of a dialogue it becomes. And then we can reiterate that information and we can refine the conversions. But you're going to remain stuck if you send inadequate amount of volume because you are stubborn to do it manually. Right? So point being here, we need to find a balance there. So over then to the relationship first outbound. So my approach is to always run things through this lens. I call it the relationship first lens, in order to not be irrelevant and send messages that just fall flat to people and or is too salesy, too spammy feeling to it. I always ask, will this message strengthen the relationship with the person in front of me or not? That's the first kind of qualifier of the message I'm sending. If it doesn't have the potential because it's too pushy, it talks about the services too much, or it's kind of vague and irrelevant, which is most people's messages, it's out. It doesn't go to the next stage, right? So that's how I define a relationship first approach, to always think, will it strengthen the relationship or not? So reason for that is because business isn't just transactional. At the end of the day, it's about connection, and being a fractional, being a consultant, it is quite intimate and it needs to be that way. And it also means longer lifetime value of each of your customers. If you can retain them longer, if you can deliver, that is going to come down to the relationship that you build. The stronger you can do that early on, the more favorable it will be from a purely business point of view, right? So having a too transactional mindset, it's short-minded and it actually is net negative, so to say. So something I invite you all to do, and that is mostly because outbound has a bit of a bad rap because people look at it like the spammy messages that we get, and it feels a bit iffy. That's generally the feedback I get. I invite you to reframe it as a proactive way to meet new awesome people, right? Not about business, not about getting the sale, like that comes later. The first thing is I am being proactive in connecting with new people, writing relevant messages that is interesting for them, so that it's mutual, so that we start building a new relationship with awesome people, right? Right. So $1 million question then. How do we make outbound successful? It is, as I've said, very rare to see an actual good message. That doesn't mean it's not possible. The thing people do wrong is that there is no upfront relevancy. And I attribute this mostly to overuse of technology. So how am I supposed to write a message to 1,000 people that resonates with all 1,000 people? It is clearly not gonna work, right? So we need to create relevancy. That starts with creating relevant lists. So technology enables us to pull a lot of people in. You can use various search platforms that I'm going to cover a bit later to find 10,000 people. And it seems great at first sight, like, look, I have 10,000 people I can approach and talk about my business. But no message is going to resonate with 10,000 people. That's not how it works. So we need to create segments, and we need to look at intent and certain social signals, social cues, certain keywords that creates common denominators inside of each segment of a list. So if we have 1,000 people, we should create batches of 50 to 100 people in each segment. And all of those 50 to 100 people share a common denominator, right? Then we can write the message with a specific type of person in mind. It's not one person, it's 50 to 100, but they share a very clear common denominator, which makes it possible to write a relevant message. Examples could be growth stage, geography, if it's a specific one. It could be recent funding. It could be who they follow on social media. It could be a certain post they interacted with on LinkedIn. If there is that common denominator, you have something you can refer to. You have a reason for reaching out to them. It's not necessarily personalized on an individual level, but that's actually not what matters. It's relevancy rather than personalization that makes outbound important, effective. Right. First part. The second part is the strategy and having thinking things through in a more holistic way. So, hi, here's my service. It's not a good first message. It's too egocentric. You shouldn't talk about you as much as about being curious about them, right? Hey, how are you doing? Is maybe polite, or let's have a virtual coffee. Maybe polite, but also very vague and doesn't really set any clear agenda of what you're looking for, right? And how you're going to build a relationship up. So think things through from the message you send, how you're going to take it step by step by step by step until the client is signed. Obviously, it's going to differ case by case, but you having a clear overview of exactly how you're going to do it and having that roadmap, that provides clarity and a framework in how to operate, so that once the reply comes, you know the steps to take, right? So to summarize that section, let me go back. Relevancy and holistic strategy. So we want to make sure we build accurate lists, and that only happens if they're a bit smaller, so we have common denominators between them. That creates relevancy, because only then can we write a relevant message. And secondly, think things through. Outbound is considered harder because you start at an earlier point. So if you think about a referral, people kind of come in the chain of client acquisition towards the later stages because they heard good things about you. They're probably already looking for the very solution. That's why they were referred in the first place. So they're coming in at a point, and then you take it from there. So you never learn the skill of every previous step, but all those previous steps are essential in you communicating what it is you actually do, what value it is you actually bring people, right? And that's something that's going to serve you across the board, and arguably to have a very sustainable, scalable, predictable business. I'd argue it's essential pieces to learn. How do I communicate my value at each stage of the customer journey? Is everything making sense so far? Give me a thumbs up if, and of course pop in a question if something isn't clear. All right. I can see half of you, so I saw some thumbs, so I continue. All right, so next is positioning. This is also something that makes or break outbound, because nothing is magic. Tools are just tools. It's how skillfully we apply the tool that makes or break it. In other words, how good is your offer? How good is your articulation of the value that you can provide? That is what it's down to. And content won't work, outbound won't work, ads won't work, not even referrals will work if you're not clear on how you provide value and how well you articulate that. So a little bit on that. How do we position ourselves as fractionals to be perceived as more valuable so that we have an easier time signing deals, essentially? First thing is to sell outcomes. You don't want to sell your time. You want to sell the result that you deliver, right? Don't sell the plane ride, sell the vacation. That type of thinking. It is very easy to get stuck in charging based on your time, but it is actually not that what people buy. They buy the outcome that you deliver. So the more you can disassociate that from the time that it takes, the more powerful of a offer you have. The more it invites you to find ways and strategies to deliver the same outcome in a more time efficient way. Don't tie it to your time. Obviously, it is to your time in a way. It's you delivering it. So you need to factor in how much it will take you to calculate if the deal is worth it for you to take or not. That's a separate thing, though. When we present it, when we position it, we don't want to emphasize the time that it takes. We don't want an hourly rate on it as much as we want. I can deliver you this outcome in this amount of time, and therefore this is the cost for it, because you will see this ROI. Secondly, you want to sell a system, and you want to be able to articulate how you're going to deliver the results, not by I will be there 8 hours a day, but rather step 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's how we're going to overcome the obstacles standing in your way to your ideal outcome, justifying how you're going to get there. There's a system that delivers them to their outcome, right? Also drastically going to improve the perceived value. So I'm talking about value a lot here. I've said it probably over 10 times already. So what is that? I'm a big fan of defining words because it's so easy to get stuck in just kind of saying things and we don't really understand what we're talking about in the first place, right? So I try to define a relationship first. I try to define predictable, what I mean in this context. So now I want to define value because it is a keyword. And the more value you can create, the more worthwhile your products, services, the more value you can communicate so that your prospect perceives it, the better you can sell, right? So there's a distinction there already between perception and reality, essentially, but that's because they haven't yet received your service. They haven't yet received the benefits. So all you have to work with is perception. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to make things valuable? This is the value equation, and it's a nice lens to just define value. How do we make it actually practical? So what we're looking at here is two things on the top of the equation. And as an equation go, we want to increase them as much as possible, because then our net value or net outcome of the equation will be higher. The things on the bottom, henceforth, we want to decrease as much as possible. So if we work this through in context of your service delivery, the first thing you have to play with is dream outcome. How brightly can you paint the picture of the life that awaits them after working with you? What are the outcome? What is the dream outcome? The more you can emphasize that, the more you can increase that in their head, the more valuable they're going to perceive it, right? Step 2 then is the perceived likelihood of that dream becoming true. So there will be some subconscious objections, right? Like, that sounds amazing. That sounds like a dream. How is that going to be possible? Now, the more you can justify why and how it's going to be possible, the higher the value. So this is your case studies. This is your testimonials. This is why referrals help a lot. But it's also back to my previous slide, systems. If you can say, and we're going to do it in step 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's clarity. That's a perceived likelihood of achievement going up, right? Then at the bottom of the equation, we have time delay and effort and sacrifice. So basically how long it's going to take to the results. If people buy into things so far, they're just going to, okay, that sounds amazing. Okay, I can see how it happens, but that's going to take a long time. So the more you can, one, make it quicker, actually deliver it quicker, the more valuable it'll be. But also, again, back to the keyword being perception, the more you can direct the attention to something that will indeed happen faster. So that it's not like, oh, the benefits are 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line. If you can redirect to, like, in the first few weeks, you will already see and experience this. And figuring out how to do that in a genuine way that isn't overpromising, right? And again, proof that it's not tied to your time. Actually, if you can deliver it in a short time, that is more valuable for them, if you charge them value in the first place. And last thing, effort and sacrifice. This is a big piece because most people that you guys work with are very busy. It's not a very crazy thing to predict. They're very busy. So any form of change is going to be perceived as a lot of effort. It's a habit change. It's new, right? And they're going to kind of have some form of panic around it. So more you can reassure them that is this, I'm going to do this part for you. I'm going to incorporate this, and it'll actually be less effort for you. You only need 30 minutes a day. That type of thing, that type of language, reassurance, will help a lot in decreasing the perceived effort and sacrifice they will have to make in order to get to their dream outcome. Right. So hopefully this you can apply this practically. And by the way, this is not just about your service. You can apply this to just about anything, to just have a practical way of measuring and increasing value. So how do I articulate the benefits? How do I articulate the likelihood that those benefits will happen? How can I articulate that it's not going to take so much time or so much effort? So a practical lens you can apply and make actual sense of value. Right. It applies everywhere. Next stage, we need to track all of this. So very typical mistake is to not have some form of CRM and keeping track of things. There's only so much. Just saw some things in the Slack channel. I learned in the chat now. Right, I'll keep that question towards the end, Rafael. But thank you very much. Right. So keeping track of the leads and following up diligently. Statistically, you will increase your replies by 65% simply by following up. It doesn't even matter what the follow-up was. Just literally like putting yourself in front once more increases things that drastically. People are busy. It is most likely just down to that. They're not ignoring you. They're not turned off by you reminding them of something. That's probably just in your head. They probably appreciate the reminder or free, right? In order to do that efficiently, we're going to need to keep track of all the leads. Look at this like a relationship manager, which is literally what it means, client relationship management, CRM, right? I feel like the HubSpots and the Salesforces and the Pipedrives and all of those kind of giant CRM platforms have overcomplicated things for people that don't need 99% of what those services bring. So I recommend to keep it much simpler than that. There's plenty of good tech and good platforms that are much simpler to use, but even keeping it as simple as using Notion, Google Sheets works just perfectly. But it needs to be clear on tracking all the leads, all the relationship you are managing, when you should follow up with each person, where they're at in your pipeline. Like, have you had a call with them? Is there a follow-up call to be scheduled? Are they in negotiation, etc.? And the last reason for this is because then, and only then, can you actually analyze any form of data and learn. If you don't have the numbers on how many people you have conversations with based on how many messages you sent, how are we going to improve that number? If you don't know how many first calls turned into actual clientele over a certain time duration, how are you supposed to learn and improve, right? So absolutely fundamental piece to keep track of everything using a CRM. All righty. So this is how we're going to put this all together. So predictable client acquisition was the topic here. That is not just lead generation. That is the entire acquisition process, from first initiating a conversation with someone until they sign the deal. Now, and further than that, that's just when it starts, right? But if we look at acquiring clients, we look at from first touch point to them signing the contract and paying the bills, right? That's the shame. We need to think about it holistically. We need to put this entire package, otherwise it won't be predictable. There's a lot of people delivering lead generation services, and that's great, but it's important to understand that that's just one piece of client acquisition. There's also a sales process, and there's a sales process that need to fit the context of where that person is coming from. A sales process to handle a referral is very different from a sales process handling someone from content or someone from outbound. Outbound, in a way, involves more steps, but my argument is that that's a good thing because we learn to articulate ourselves at each and every step, regardless of where the person is at, so we can sign the person that we need predictable in a self-reliant way. So how we put it all together needs to start with defining your ICP and refining your own positioning. That is foundational. So how I invite people to think about this is to split it into specifics and characteristics. Essentially, who is the best person for you to have a conversation with? And then further down the line, start working with specifically. So now we're looking at job titles, geography, industry, specific metrics that you can apply search filters for in order to find them and use technology to find them. That's one piece. But the other piece is characteristics. You need to also understand their pain points. what keeps them up at night, where they're at in the growth stage of their company, how they perceive the problem, which might not be how the actual problem is or how you would see the problem, but how they perceive the problem. So this is psychological stuff. And the more you can understand them on that deeper layer, the better message you're going to formulate, and also the better equipped you're going to be at segmenting the list appropriately to end up with the right people in the right segment so that you can write the right message, right? So other way of saying this, specifics enables you to build a rough list of all the type of people in the type of companies and the type of geographies that you want. But characteristics is what's going to make and break making it fully relevant and making outbound work. So we need both. Then we build the lists. So Sales Navigator is a great place to start. There's a lot of things to do, but for most purposes, for most fractionals, you don't need to go beyond that. You can find the people on LinkedIn, and Sales Navigator is efficient enough at it. I highly recommend you split second and first degree connections. In other words, people that are connected with you inside of your existing network and people that are not. The people that are not, you first need to connect with, and that should be something you do all the time without exceptions, in my opinion. There's limits to LinkedIn. You can send 30, sometimes up towards 40 connections a day. The closer you get to that number, the better, because there's no reason to not connect with someone that can become an opportunity. That is you expanding your network. That's something I believe should be non-negotiable business activity. And again, using technology to do that, and it's very, very time efficient. And then based on that, now that they're in your network, whether they were already in your network or you just added them to your network, you want to segment those lists into many small lists by intent. And again, this is probably a session in and of itself that I would love to have as a side note. What technology can you utilize and how can you utilize that technology to look at those intents, to find the people that interact with a certain type of post on LinkedIn or are in a certain growth stage or just got funded, right? Those type of things. Next, we want to pick an outbound methods. So again, basically applying a holistic strategy and connecting with the list and messaging them automatically. Referring back to the balance of the human connection and technology, my perspective is that building the lists, the first step we can use technology for. We can find roughly the amount of people that are correct. But then we should not use technology to really filter it down and make that last little effort. That's where human effort pays off, where we have leverage in applying ourselves, right? When it's time to send a message, we should not automate the process of writing the message. We should creatively think about that. Like, how can I write a message that resonates with this specific person that I have now defined right in front of me? But sending the messages, that's just silly copy and pasting, being time efficient. So not being time efficient. So using technology to automate the actual just sending process after those steps, I think is finding that and striking that balance. Now, from there on, you need to test, review, and reiterate. You or I are not accurate in what we think. The only way to get what you need here is testing. It's talking to actual prospects and reiterating based on that data. So if you send an outbound message and you get no replies, you need to analyze why that is. If you start seeing some traction, you need to understand what was it that worked, doubling down on that. In other words, you need to A/B test a lot. On average, for new clients of mine, we do 5 or more scripts that we cycle through. And on average, and I would say this is pretty good numbers, 2 out of 10 work to some extent. So it's just not going to be correct that you're going to write a message that you like and it's going to work. That's irrelevant. What's relevant is what resonates with them. And the only way to find that out is to test, analyze, and reiterate. Next up, we set up a CRM. We import every single new person that you have a conversation with into the CRM, and we compartmentalize them based on where they're at in the stage of our pipeline. If they've had a call, if they need a follow-up, if they are in negotiation, so we can keep things structured. And we update that on a daily basis because otherwise you forget it, and it becomes a nightmare to try to update it in a week in retrospect. And maybe most important, you add reminders so that you remember when to follow up with a certain person and you remember where that conversation left off, right? What was the last thing you did with that specific prospect so that you're reminded when to follow up, but also how to follow up. All right. Next thing, and this is something I haven't yet covered, is how do we take it from there? How do we actually convert? So we need a sales process that fits into this entire framework and works in an outbound context. That starts with creating something I call an offer template. And this is basically a practical application of the value equation that I just shared. The goal is to make a template that is about 80% applicable for all your future prospects. Now, I'm perfectly aware that most of you customize your offers a lot based on the person in front of you. That's a great thing, and I think that's how it should be, especially as a fractional. It's kind of part of the point. However, you also do almost, or at least roughly the same thing in all your engagements. If you can reverse engineer that and pull out those common denominators and see this is the type of thing we always start with, and then we do this, and then we do this, and then we do this, and you can templatize it as much as possible, you're now building a system. And presenting a system at this stage is going to provide a lot more clarity for your prospects. So we don't want it to be 100% because that would just be a generic program or course, right? But we want it to be as applicable as possible for all future prospects, so that the last 20% is what you customize. Now, when you conduct your assessment, your initial calls, that's the information that is missing. You know what you can deliver. You know the type of service you're going to bring to them, roughly, at least. The information that you need now becomes that last 20%. What questions do I need to ask to get the information I'm missing to complete the proposal for them based on a template I already have, right? Small little tips to that make a big difference is recording calls and actually using AI to, first of all, remember what you talked about, but also have a little back and forth with ChatGPT based on the transcript. What did they say? What pain points are they experiencing? How does that relate to my offer? And actually having a conversation with ChatGPT to find out those last 20% and get some help and collaboration that way. And then actually making a video proposal. So rather than just sending out a blank, boring piece of text, talk over it a bit, present it to them, refer to things they said. It's like, this part of my service, I think will make a lot of sense for you based on insert what they said on the actual call in their own words, right? Nice way to add authenticity, while also kind of strengthening your service in relation to their pain points. Hope this is making sense. So lastly then is the sales process. And this is what I call the 4A sales process. I kind of miss sharing this story, so I'm gonna do it now. But one big thing, so before I started my first business, I worked in door-to-door sales. That's why I was talking about it earlier. And I became very good at it very quickly, but I don't think the reason for that was because I had like natural sales skills in a traditional way of being persuasive or something like this. I think I was just more strategic than most of my colleagues. So door to door, you get handed a list of doors to knock, right? And most of my colleagues would just go top to bottom, start knocking. But what they ended up doing was walking in a zigzag across neighborhoods, right? Like one door there, one door here, 20-minute walk. Oops, they weren't home. Next door, right? Completely wasting time and just being inefficient. So what I would do was starting to filter the list of like kind of gauging the area when it wasn't even peak time and no one were home anyway. And see like, oh, they're clearly on holiday, strike them off the list. It's like, oh, cool, they have this thing in their garden noted. Make a little note. So now I have something to reference. Now I have an opener, right? Why I'm saying this is because that's kind of what came full circle for me with creating relevant lists. Like the only way you're going to make this happen is by building a better list of people that share common denominators so that you can be efficient. And now that's when technology comes in, because we're doing this digitally rather than door knocking. You can, same principle applies, but then you can leverage technology to do that better, right? Little side story for you all that I was meant to mention up here. All right, so then into the sales process. The first step we need to do for a successful sales process is assessment. We need to understand pains and needs and then get permission to share. And that is a way to politely invite ourselves to a next step. Always ask for permission before doing something. It's just a more polite way. And when they opt in, it's way harder to opt out rather than just asking, telling like, do you want to call tomorrow? It's like, hey, would it be okay if we, like, just that formulation makes a lot of sense, both in outbound and when entering the sales process. So the first call, the first A in this sales process, is asking questions, being genuinely curious about them, and not looking for solutions, not talking about yourself or your services, but just assessing them as much as possible. At the tail end of that call, you say, hey, based on all of that, I have a good few ideas I think would be helpful for you. Would it be okay that I make an overview of that? You might not use the label proposal at this stage if it's early on. So just an overview of what I think I can help you with. And I'll share that with you, and you can go through that at your own time, and then we can have a follow-up to discuss that and go a bit deeper. I don't think I've had anyone say no to this, like to this day, including clients of mine, right? It just makes sense because you've listened to them, you really dug into them, you've shown that you were curious about them and their business and their situation, and then you have some suggested improvements that you're just going to freely share with them. Would that be okay, right? That's the type of vibe we want to create. The next A is align. So that's where our offer template comes in. That's why we did that beforehand, because now we have a template to refer to. So based on that assessment that you did, you fill in the missing information. You align your service as the solution to the pain point that they themselves expressed in their own words, right? The stronger you can align that, the easier the sale will be. So if you can sync that up to 100%, you're good to go. That's when a deal is signed, right? So maybe you didn't get enough information in that initial meeting. That's okay. You do it as much as possible. So you personalize the offer template to fit the specific prospects perfectly. Then you share it with them. Then you have the follow-up call, which, by the way, you should have booked in on that first call. Always like book that in and then share the overview in between. On the follow-up call, it's collaboration. The A is adjustment, right? I don't like the notion that sales is persuasive, like we're sitting on opposite ends of a table and I'm trying to just forcefully bring you over to mine. I think it's about alignment and collaboration and creating a win-win scenario. And if it isn't a win-win scenario, I don't think it's a smart thing to take their money, so to say. It needs to be creating alignment, right? And you do that by assessing and then bringing in how your service is actually the perfect thing for them right now, right? This is also why this entire thing is a holistic strategy, because if you didn't define your recipe, that's not going to be the case, and it's going to become and feel forceful. If that is the case, and you build a relevant lead list and you write a relevant message, all of these steps, then this is going to feel aligned already, and you're looking at a win-win. So this call is to objection handling. It might be a bit reassurance. It might be adjusting the duration or maybe some negotiations around the pricing to find final alignment. Then you can update the offer and make it more like a final proposal, and that's when you lock in the deal, and the final A therefore is to agree. That is it for my presentation. So we will have a Q&A. I saw a few more questions pop up. And in the meantime, what you see on your screen here is a QR code that you can scan to book a call with me. And that is to learn more about this entire system, how it could apply to you, and how me and my team could potentially help do this all for you, right? So no obligation, no pressure call. As I hope I just got through, very, very curious to learn more about each one of you and your businesses, and then simply see if there would be alignment for us to work together. And if so, it would be a win-win, right? So for our first call, I'm just eager to get to know whoever wants to get to know me and have a chat. So scan the code there, and you'll be forwarded to a page to book in a session. Alrighty. And actually, I'll drop my link in the chat here as well if the QR code didn't work or you don't have your phone handy or whatnot. So there's a link in the chat as well. Okay, cool. So Q&A then. How are we for time? Okay, we have 15-ish minutes. So if you have a lot of questions, we can fill it, but otherwise we'll just wrap up whenever we are out of questions. Right. So Rafael, I will start with your questions. All right, I'll just read it out so people don't have to find it. I've always struggled to quantify, define outcomes when it comes to my services, finance and strategy. So you're a fractional CFO. Yes, there are some outcomes like raising cash, but the vast majority of the work is managing cash flow, planning strategy and growth. so other teams can deliver results. How do I define outcomes when most of my work is helping others deliver on their outcomes? Yes, great question, and I'm gonna bet that everyone else in there is asking that question as well. Totally get it. It's one of my sayings is, if you are not confident to hit the nail on the head, you shouldn't swing the hammer, right? And there is a nature of certain services that makes it less tangible, and that's just the truth, right? So trying to forcefully pretend like you're gonna double someone's revenue in 3 months, that's just not accurate, and therefore you shouldn't do that. That's being disingenuous, straight up, right? However, other side of that is the principles also apply, and my experience with working with coaches, consultants, fractionals over basically a decade. And by the way, I didn't mention that, but that's my background as well. So my first business was coaching, my second one consulting. I get the struggle. I feel it. And the lesson I learned the hard way, as well as the lesson I kind of need to teach most of my clients, is don't sacrifice clarity for accuracy. What I mean by that is, we have an urge to be accurate in saying exactly what is going to happen. So if we don't know the outcome, we don't want to mention it at all. But what you actually do is, inside of all of that, is also a disservice for yourself and for your prospect, because you don't bring any clarity up front, right? So there's a very fine line to strike between how you articulate and that you try to tie that to a specific outcome. That does not mean you can't be honest about, I don't know exactly what's going to turn out to double your revenue. However, I have worked with this and this person in the past, and this type of thing tends to generate that. So that's what you can expect. Fine line, but still very important to not go in so far in the direction of, I want it to be accurate, so I'm not going to promise that. I'm not going to like put this outcome out there because I don't know if it's going to happen. True, you can predict the future. However, you're not going to give them the clarity that they need, and therefore maybe not the service that they actually needed and would get them to the outcome. Hope that makes sense. Please ask follow-up question if that was a bit vague, and I'll try to answer it. James dropping off for another call. No worries. Pleasure to have you. John Friedman, I love recommendations for super simple CRMs that are cheap or free and not terrible. The free version of HubSpot sucks the life out of me. Yeah. Yes, 100%. So a few recommendations. I like Folk. I'll write it in the chat. That one I used for the longest time. It's super simple, super clean interface, no fluffy, unnecessary features. There's a Chrome extension that you can one-click import people off of their LinkedIn profile. Very slick. Right now, I actually built my own CRM in Notion. So I'm guessing most of you are familiar with that. So that's kind of custom build, and I did that more for my own agency, and for that to be applicable across all my clients, and for all my clients to have it natively in the same workspace as everything else we do. Basically works the same as Folk. So just those are some specific recommendations. And for the typical fractional or consultant, I highly recommend it over going HubSpot, or I honestly was never consistent enough with those big platforms because they were just too complicated and too much headache. So I didn't end up being consistent, and that completely defeats the purpose, right? Okay, next question or comment, Nick Black. This was interests, particularly definition of value and positioning. I need to drop off now. Well, thank you very much. Ralph sent out connection requests already. Thank you. Looking forward to connect. And E, whoever that is. What if your service is more about building operations, scaling teams, and improving skills? For marketing, this isn't used to sell people except but many. Okay. Back to the point of selling the outcome. If you need to stop selling features and sell the benefit. You're not selling the vehicle you deliver in, but where the vehicle gets you. What I mean by that is, if you sell SEO, let's say website optimization, that is not what you're selling. What you're selling is what that brings them. So increased revenue. This actually simplifies a lot, because if you're doing billing operations, scaling teams, improving skills, you are saving them time, you are increasing their revenue, you're increasing their efficiency, and you can take that as far as probably improving their work-life balance as well, if you're talking to a certain decision maker, right? That's what you're actually selling. That's the value that they will perceive, maybe subconsciously, but still the truth, right? So again, this does not mean that you can say like, hey, I sell increased work-life balance. No, but you lead with that, you highlight those benefits. I can help you increase your revenue. If you can quantify that based on examples or guesstimations, great, because it's more clear. Then you explain, and this is how I do it by building operation scaling teams, improving skills. And the more you can unpack that and make that clear and make kind of subsections of that, the more clearly you can justify why it's going to increase the revenue by so and so, right? So that's just a distinction. You're actually selling the benefits, and this is how you deliver the benefits. Hope that makes sense. Okay, Rafael, a follow-up. Perfect. It does help, thank you, though it goes against much of what I've heard up until now, which is that I need to sell tangible results. I find it very hard to find the right balance between accuracy and relevancy. Yes, absolutely. No, I'm not making no claims that it's easy. It's definitely hard. Yeah, so I think people recommend it for the right reason. You need to sell tangible results because it is clearer. But again, my saying of don't hit the nail, don't swing the hammer if you're not confident you're going to hit the nail, right? So if you can't make it tangible, don't force it. It's just going to look silly. And most people, most of you are dealing with high-level decision makers, they're veterans in business. It's not going to work, right? So I think that's a bit too generic of a recommendation in general. But again, flip side of that is you do need to be more relevant and more clear, and maybe sometimes that is at a compromise of what feels correct to you, right? But sometimes you just need to get out of your way because it's not about you, it's about them and the benefits they will derive. Neil, very informative session. Thank you very much. Okay, perfect. Glad it helped. And Ashoka, hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, is sending useful value-driven consulting newsletters to segmented opt-in subscribers would be a good strategy to start and build your list. Different newsletter for different segments once a week. Yes, I guess a short answer. Slightly longer answer would be clear differentiation between client lead generation and lead nurturing. And what you're talking about here is more how you nurture pre-existing leads, right? So if we're sending a first message to someone, what we need is their attention. We need to start a conversation. That needs to be the sole goal, the first step, right? Once they're in your pipeline, they're being nurtured. This is the type of thing that is a good thing to keep progressing the pipeline and move them closer and closer towards closing. So kind of long-term nurturing. I would say it's a very good thing for. Not speaking to you directly now, Ashoka, because I know nothing about you. So just as a general note, what I see across the board is people focus on these type of things prematurely because they don't talk to enough people. They don't generate enough new conversations in the first place. So that is probably where you need to focus and then look at this as a later thing, a problem to solve when it is actually becoming a problem, and just first things first type of mentality. General note, if you think it applied to you, then it probably did. Alrighty. Any more questions? Please do write them in the chat or feel free to jump on the mic as well.
David, I just want to say thank you, and I'll be booking a session in with you in a short while.
I much appreciate that. Neil, right? I think I
Yeah.
saw. Yeah, perfect. I look forward to it. Thanks a lot. That's awesome to hear. All right, I'll give you 20 more seconds. I'm trying to look at the cameras to see if anyone is typing. Might not be typing to me, to be fair, but alrighty. Cool. I think that's it then. Oh, no, job bull. There we go. Last question then. Any tips on getting a client to re-engage? I'm having issues with an extremely busy person responding very slowly. Yes, in the align stage. Okay, nice that you caught up on that. Yeah, you need to get creative, right? The dilemma is things always go down the list of priority when it delays and it's not super clear on the value that they're going to receive, right? So this person is probably busy. It doesn't mean he doesn't want to need your services or that he's ignoring you. It doesn't mean that. But it did mean that somewhere along the line, you lost urgency towards the benefit you could have brought him, right? So in hindsight, or for next one, probably scheduling a call a bit sooner or nurturing a bit more before the call or slightly after the call of like following up like, hey, great call, looking forward to the next one. Always scheduling in the call, scheduling the next call on the current call, right? Things to consider for next time. Now, as far as re-engaging them, it's going to be down to two things. How can you bring them value and running things through that lens? So what type of resource can you either share because you already have it, or you can actually put together? Maybe you can record a short little video and you say, hey, I thought a little bit further about what we discussed and recorded this 3-minute video. Give it a watch when you have the time, something like this. So it's like showing that you put extra effort and extra thought into it and delivering that. That's a great way. The other would be a little bit, if it's later in the stage and you kind of start to talking prices a little bit, that would be to more like re-emphasize the benefits of it, is making sure is like, hey, just wanted to clarify based on the last call, I believe I can help you. Boom, boom, boom. Let's get on that follow-up call, or like refer back to what the next step he should have taken was. Right. So short version is value driven, restating the benefits and making sure that's top of mind, because the only reason he's not replying to you is because he doesn't perceive it as valuable enough. Like bottom line, if he perceived it as a life changer that he can't live without, he would have been jumping on it, right? So there's a perception of value that is not as high as it should be. You need to look for ways to increase that.
David, actually, I've got one question. If you go back to, your slide where you talk about establishing predictable client acquisition. Oh, sorry. You were talking on there is that those stats is, I think I talk, that's the one, yeah. Are those common stats? You're saying like 30 to 35%
Yeah.
on LinkedIn connection acceptance?
Yeah.
How would I increase that?
Anything above 30%, I would consider good. It's still a massive, it depends, but to put an average on it, I would say so, yeah.
Okay. And then to obviously to take that one step further is what you're referring to then is how do I then convert those 30% to actually having those conversations?
Yep, sure. So again, big, it depends on what type of message you sent in the first place, because if it was a more direct message that maybe asked for a call or like, would you be interested in chatting this on a 20-minute call, that would be a more direct path. And if it was more kind of an open-ended question, then it will be a bit of a conversation from there. Rough numbers is about half of positive replies to translate into an actual meeting, right? So quick math, 10 people sent the connections, 3 accept, 100 people, 30 accept, 10% reply, that's 3 people, 1 or 2 book in the call.
Okay, that's not too bad. That's kind of what I'm hitting at the moment then.
Okay. Yeah, that was
Thank
good.
you.
So it's an overview of all the conversions. Actually, this becomes a good way to finish off the session. To make it predictable, you want an overview of the conversion rate of each little kind of micro step, right? So to get a positive reply, I send this many messages, right? To get a call booked, I need this many positive replies. To get a follow-up call, I need this many first calls. To get a client signed, and this many, right? If you have those numbers, even when they're not very good, you still know, I need to connect with this many people and I will sign a client in a reasonable time frame, right?
Yeah,
Now we have predictability, but we also have the opportunity to improve the conversion on every step. And we can look at, this is the main bottleneck, let's fix that. Next, right?
fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. All right. I think we kind of nailed the time as well, Chelsea. So let's wrap it up.